Well, over a year of inflation has taken a toll on the average American and their rainy day fund as well. 38% of US adults reported they have no emergency savings. That's up from 34% the year prior, according to a recent AARP survey. Now, most experts suggest keeping enough cash on hand to cover 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. That's a daunting goal for those who've seen their savings dip. Joining us now with tips to how to improve your saving status is George Manus, Executive Director at AARP, the magazine. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So, as we've seen this number of people who don't have enough to cover their emergency savings continuing to rise, what are your top tips then for building or rebuilding your emergency fund, especially if you've had to dip into it?
Well, the top tip, if there's, I would condense all of my tips into one top tip, which is automate, automate, automate. The easiest way to build an emergency fund is slow and steady. And instead of having sort of to make the decision to put your money in a fund, week by week by week, you do it once. It's easy to get your bank to transfer money to a separate account, and it should be in a separate account. It could be $5 a week. It could be $25 a month. Whatever it is, just get started little by little. Every little bit helps. And so that's really the top suggestion is automate, automate, automate. And really, again, don't be daunted, don't be intimidated by when somebody like us tells you it's great to have 3 or 6 or even 9 months of money in an emergency fund. Longest journey begins with the smallest steps, and you should start with that. So that's your first thing. Automate, automate, automate. Put your money into a separate account where you are not tempted to dip into it for everyday expenses. The second thing that's really important. Sorry, Rachelle?
Oh, no, please continue. You had your top tip there. I want to hear your second one as well.
The second one is then you got to do the tough work if you don't think that you have enough to spare. And in fact, our survey found that 61% of people said what was preventing them from adding to an emergency fund was the high cost of everyday living expenses. And no surprise over the past few years that's a situation given inflation. The next thing you got to do is you got to really look at your expenses on every day, like open up your credit card bill. You probably have a lot of standing charges there that you maybe even forget that you're paying for every month. You can go through and you can say, well, I got the subscription to this streaming service, this streaming service, this streaming service, and this one. Maybe I can cut back on 1 or 2 of them. So that's one thing to do is really comb your expenses, especially the ones that are on autopilot, and see how you can cut them back. The next thing you can do is try to figure out ways to find more money. And that, of course, is the side gig. And you don't have to print up business cards. It might even be as simple as looking in your basement and saying, boy, I got a lot of stuff in here. Maybe I could sell it on, Craigslist. I'm not recommending any particular site, but maybe you can sell it and get rid of all the stuff that is gathering dust in your basement.
So, George, I do want to ask you, because for some people, they're not actually sure sort of where to track where their money is going. For people who want to get a baseline of what they actually need versus perhaps so they can figure out where they can trim, what do you recommend in terms of finding out your baseline for what your essentials are so that you can figure out when to trim?
Well, that's a good question, Rachelle. What you really need to do is when you know your essentials for example, by looking at the stuff that you've had to pay. So it's just as simple sometimes as sitting down with a paper and pencil, pull up your bank statement, pull up your credit card statement. You know that there are expenses you have every month. The big 3, you got to start with shelter, food, and health. So You go through there and you say, well, I know I got to spend this on rent and I have to spend this on my utilities. Then you go to food and you say, how much of my food is food that I purchase at the grocery store? How much of it is stuff where I get home from work late, I'm tired, and I do takeout, those getting home late and getting tired and not having anything around the house and doing takeout, that adds up over time. So really, you have the evidence in your hand. It's not like you need an expert to come and tell you this is where to cut back. You have the knowledge in your hands where you can look at your bank statement, you can look at your credit card statement, and you can look at your Venmo and what you're paying your friends for, and you can say, once you actually sit down and take maybe 3 months of bills or 3 months of statements and add them all together, no one's going to have to tell you where to cut back. You'll know.
And so then in terms of factoring in things like stock market volatility, if you're looking at your investments or inflation as well, how should people be viewing that when they're trying to make regular contributions, but they keep seeing certain things ticking up?
Well, for that, and especially if you're younger, the time is really on your side. You have to, sort of have a bifurcated view of life. You have to think about, okay, what do I need this month? What are my needs right now? And stock market, and either way, whether you're looking at short term or long term, what the stock market is doing at that moment shouldn't be affecting your decisions. So for the short term, you say, okay, I need this amount of money and this is the basics to get me through. For the long term, what you need is to take the long view, to realize that, as important as what's going on, let's say right now with the debt ceiling and everything like that, I think 20 or 30 years from now, as you're closer to retirement, or 10 years from now, even 5 years from now, you're going to kind of look back on this moment and say, well, that was a blip. Remember 2008, 2009, we all thought the world was coming to an end. And look where we are now. Anybody who took money out of the market and didn't put it back in is not doing as well as that person who really took the long view. So you can't let the short-term movement of the market distract you from either your day-to-day issues or your long-term goals. And one of the places that, we like to recommend for where to get advice about planning both for the short term and for the long term for your security and retirement, where we're suggesting you go is, shockingly to us, go to AARP.org/money. And we have years and years of information and knowledge and collected wisdom of all our journalists with really great advice about how to deal with both short-term crises and also planning for the long-term and your long-term financial security.
And George, just very quickly, because I know that when we talk about inflation and the stock market impact, we did see it was the 30 to 49-year-olds who really saw a significant sort of change in how they were saving and whether they were saving or not. But overall, though, in the study that you guys did, it did show that people were more optimistic than not over the next 12 months. If you could just quickly tell us, what do you think is driving that optimism?
It could be like human nature. And I think, and this is just a wild guess, but it could be, we went through the pandemic and that was awful. And it feels, although COVID is still an issue, we are not locked down. People are going traveling this summer. People are saying, okay, between, the people who do have money and the people who do see a little bit of daylight and the people who haven't been taking vacations because where are they going to go? And I think maybe it's even just the summer coming. You're just feeling great and you just got to get out there and you got to go places.
Well, I do appreciate you joining us with those great tips and all that insight. George Mannis there, Executive Director at AARP, the magazine. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Rachelle.